Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. Welcome to Workplace NL's Psychological Health and Safety Week. Today, we are going to talk about psychological health and safety, a guide to managing hazards, a practical guide to managing hazards. My name is Kathy Bear-Princeton, and I'm a Senior Health and Safety Advisor with Workplace NL, and I'm very happy that you decided to join me today for this webinar. This week is Psychological Health and Safety Week, and our goal is to raise awareness about psychological health and safety in the workplace and to talk about practical solutions for lowering the risk of psychological harm to workers' mental health. Psychological hazards, we know, are present in every workplace. They may look different and they present themselves in different ways, but they are a risk in all workplaces. We are talking about mental health more and more because of the link between our physical well-being and our mental health. The WHO told us in 1979 that there is no health without mental health. It has taken 44 years for us to really understand that critical connection. Never before has the case for mental health awareness and promotion of mental health in the workplace been so important. This week, we plan to educate you on ways that you can improve your own mental health in the workplace and improve work arrangements and relationships to reduce the risk of psychological harm. Before we begin, just a couple housekeeping items to be reviewed. In the materials sections, you will find a PDF copy of the presentation today. There's also going to be some additional resources that we will discuss along the way. I do encourage you to ask questions, to participate. You can just pop your question in the chat and we will get to the questions. Just one second, I'm going to pause for a second. Okay, sorry about that. I thought there was an issue. So hopefully we're all good and everybody can hear me okay. As I was saying, at the end, we will take some of your questions and hopefully get a chance to respond to those. If not, as always, we can be available after the fact. And you can email us and Tina will provide all of that information in the chat for you. At the end of the webinar, there's also an evaluation form, and we just encourage you to complete that with all your thoughts and ideas, and we really do appreciate that. So today, what we're specifically going to look at is psychological safety and psychological hazards. We're going to look at the process to assess that in your own workplace, to identify and fix hazards. We're going to share some practical controls, so some things that you can practically look at doing in your own workplace, things that can be implemented and hopefully you will find helpful. We're also going to leave you with some tools in your toolbox so that when this session is over today, you have something to refer to and something to help you guide the process for managing psychological hazards. So during the webinar, I am going to be asking you to share some of your valuable thoughts, some of your feedback, and we will do some reflections. So I am going to ask you to participate and share your thoughts with me in the chat. Tina will manage the chat and your responses will be anonymous. So I'm just going to So let's start by ensuring we're all on the same page with psychological safety. So psychological safety is demonstrated and present when workers feel safe to ask questions, to seek feedback, to report mistakes and problems, and to bring up new ideas without fearing negative consequences to themselves for the job that they do. A workplace that is psychologically healthy and safe is one that promotes workers' mental well-being, and it prevents harm by fostering an environment where people feel respected, supported, and it focuses on a positive culture, clear policies, and proactive risk management for mental health. In psychological health and in a psychologically healthy and safe workplace, psychological hazards are resolved and controlled. Many of us are likely used to and understand physical and health hazards, something like maybe an icy parking lot caused by risks, which would cause us a risk of falling, having to lift or move heavy objects. But we may be less familiar or still learning about recognizing psychological hazards in the workplace. These hazards are elements of the work that have the potential to impact workers' psychological well-being and potentially cause psychological harm. These are related to how the work is actually carried out. They are sometimes a little bit harder to see. They could be in very stringent deadlines, workload, work methods, and how the work is managed, including relationships and interactions with leaders and colleagues or clients. Psychological hazards have the potential to affect both well-being in the workplace and our well-being outside the workplace. As well, there is a significant cost to workplaces when these hazards are not identified or addressed. We will discuss the business case for psychological health and safety in our webinar on Wednesday. The terms psychological hazards and psychosocial hazards are often used interchangeably. So it is possible today I may refer to psychological hazards as psychosocial hazards, but they do mean the same thing. So these hazards can be present in any organization or industry, and they are the result of many kinds of work tasks or employment arrangements. Some workplaces will have hazards with a higher risk and more serious outcomes for uncontrolled hazards, but all workers do have psychosocial hazards. Most workplaces would have a process in place already to identify and fix the physical hazards we discussed. I'd like to ask you a question now. And if your workplace has a process, which it is really required to identify and control psychological hazards, this poll question is anonymous. And when everyone's answers are in, we're going to display the percentage of yeses or nos. So what I want to ask you is, does the process for identification and control in your workplace include assessing psychological hazards? So currently, are you just assessing physical hazards or psychological hazards as well? So Tina's going to launch that poll and you'll get a chance to provide your response. So a number of you, 41 of you, responded that yes, the process does identify psychological hazards, which I'm very pleased to see. Some of you said no, and then there was a number of people who weren't sure if it did assess psychological hazards. So thank you so much for participating. And for those of you that said yes, that's really good. And hopefully today you will learn a little bit more about the process of managing those hazards. And for those of you that said no or I don't know, hopefully you will get some important information about why the process really does need to include psychological hazards as well. So as we said, employers are responsible to have a system in place to identify, to assess, and to control workplace hazards. More recently, maybe we're looking at probably the past decade, we have realized that this system must also include an assessment of all types of hazards that could have negative consequences to a worker's health, safety, and well-being, including those psychological hazards. Ideally, psychological hazards should be managed consistent with other OSH hazards and through an occupational health and safety program, and should be integrated into the organization's broader business practices. Addressing psychological hazards in the workplace definitely relies on a partnership between the employer and the workers. Everyone is accountable and has responsibilities. The employer should lead the process, while managers and workers are required to participate and to provide that support. There are a lot of factors that can determine the nature and the severity of an outcome from a psychological risk in the workplace. And we know that employers do have a very significant role to play in eliminating those hazards or minimizing the risks and preventing harm to workers. However, both the organization and the workers have that shared responsibility for maintaining and improving health and safety and well-being at work. While individuals are responsible for their own mental well-being, employers are required to do no harm. And throughout this week, as we talk more about psychological health and safety, and as you join us hopefully for the other webinars, you will learn more about the individual responsibilities and what a psychological healthy and safe workplace looks like in more detail. So as I said, the successful management of psychological risk calls for a commitment throughout an organization, but especially from the top management. So let's look at some of the things that management will be required to do in order to lead that process. So it's really important that management are committed and involved. To lead the process of managing psychological hazards, some of the things that a leader will need to do is strongly demonstrate commitment to managing those risks and to promoting the well-being of workers. They need to empower workers to report and to protect workers from the fear of reporting. So there has to be mechanisms, which we will talk a little bit more about as we go along, for employers to report psychological hazards. But it's really important to make sure that when workers do that, they understand that that is a safe process. It's important that leaders also determine and assign the resources needed to make them available in a timely, efficient way. And it's also necessary that all the workplace parties, employees, supervisors, employers, they all need to know what they're responsible to do. They need to know how to manage hazards. They need to know, when that process is going to be carried out, who is responsible for what. And some of the things that we're going to look at today will help define whose role, what role everyone should take. So let's dig a little bit into the process of assessing and managing psychological hazards. So today we're going to look at 4 steps: identifying, evaluating risk, finding solutions, and monitoring the process. So the process starts with looking at what first can cause harm to our workers. We can't fix what we don't know is broken. So this step includes things like identifying all reasonable, foreseeable hazards, considering the aspects of work, so looking at the actual work and the situations that could potentially harm workers while they're doing their work, and why these things may be occurring in your workplace. You want to make sure that the process identifies hazards for less common, but potentially serious situations as well. So I think we know that spotting physical hazards on the job may seem easier than identifying psychological hazards. Yet that doesn't mean that psychological hazards are less dangerous or that it is too hard or too complicated to address them. And hopefully today we will make that process seem, a little bit less complicated. So there are several effective methods to determine what hazards may be present in the workplace. And I think that's, a good thing to know and to understand that there are many different ways that you can do that. Workplaces really should use multiple methods. So we have a list of methods there. And I really encourage that workers would use, or workplaces would use multiple methods to identify psychological hazards. Because really often these hazards can be quite complex. Sometimes they're invisible, and they can really manifest differently across maybe various roles or individuals even within the workplace. So relying on a single method of identification, such as maybe only conducting a survey, can miss critical nuances or fail to really identify the root causes of the stress or the lack of support or respect. So using a variety of methods, such as surveys, focus groups, employee interviews, maybe reviewing existing data, provides a more comprehensive, accurate, and actionable understanding of the work environment. Using multiple methods to identify the hazards also helps capture the diverse and complex nature of the hazards. Psychological hazards are not always immediately obvious, and they often require a little bit of a deeper investigation or a deeper look. So a combination of methods will also allow organizations to understand maybe not just what the issues are, but why they are happening. So another important reason to use multiple methods is to overcome underreporting. So, something research does show and point out to us is that because of the personal nature of psychological harm, employees may not feel comfortable reporting incidents. For example, things like maybe harassment or bullying through really formal channels. Perhaps there's a fear of, the outcome of that or how they'll be looked at. So anonymous surveys can catch what formal reporting sometimes does miss. Involving staff directly in the identification process will really empower workers and ensure that solutions are practical, tailored, and credible. So some of the tools that we can use, surveys. Surveys are really good for getting a high-level overview of the workplace psychological climate or the culture. Consultation with workers, maybe focus group or individual interviews can be essential for understanding the why behind the trends that we're seeing. Detailed data review, so like analyzing HR data, some things like turnover, maybe absenteeism, can help identify maybe hidden problem areas that aren't as obvious. And then workplace inspection, observing behavior, observing the environment, can really help identify hazards like excess unmanageable workloads. By using this comprehensive approach of using multiple ways to identify the hazards, it really can foster a truly supportive and productive environment. So remember that this first step, identifying the hazards, is a very important step in the process of overall managing the hazards. The goal is to protect workers from psychological harm. It's impossible to manage or eliminate hazards that are unknown. So I would really encourage employers and workplaces to take their time with this step and make sure that it is comprehensive. So things that you can look for, you might want to review types of leave being used. Is there maybe there's excessive unused leave. Maybe that indicates that employees feel that they're not able to take time off. There also may be some patterns of use, such as frequently taking unplanned leave, which can be associated with unpleasant working conditions or work-related stress. So it's really important to kind of dig into things like leave patterns and to identify what possibly could be happening and the whys. So you also might want to look at the hours of work. So what are the shifts? Would the actual hours of work cause fatigue? Is there excessive overtime being used? Are there shifts that are not well managed, or are workers not able to take rest breaks during shifts? So all of that is very, I guess, dependent on the type of work that you do and the type of workplace. So that, that review and the outcome of those statistics and the data that you find certainly will be, related to the type of work that you do. So injury rates can also help identify patterns and trends of claims that can provide information about concerns in the workplace. So, sometimes mechanisms of injury associated with psychological injury claims or return to work data after a worker has been off can be helpful to understand some of the hazards that may be present. For example, is it hard to get employees to return to work once they have been cleared for duties? And that might be something, that may need to be considered. Different types of incidents that might be occurring in the workplace also may provide insight into the type of hazards that may be present. Also, grievances at work can indicate conflict, unfair treatment, maybe lack of role clarity. They could indicate that there's harassment in the workplace, maybe discrimination, or bullying. Look for summary data. You can also look at the summary data for Employee Assistance Program, which can indicate either positive or negative trends, such as work-related reasons for referral compared to personal reasons for referral. You also may want to look at the number of referrals that is related to things like workplace stress or bullying in the workplace, or exposure to a critical incident at the workplace. As an employer, you can also look at the OSH committee meeting minutes and the toolbox talks and staff meetings. And that way you can, indicate if there is heavy workload or, things of that nature. So also hazard reports can indicate worker satisfaction, dissatisfaction regarding maybe leadership styles or whether there is a proper management of conflict in the workplace. On Friday, we are going to come back to talk a little bit more about conflict in work and at the workplace and how we can deal with that appropriately. So another way to identify hazards is with employee reporting. Workers should be encouraged to report hazards, but it's really important to make sure that reports of psychological hazards are taken seriously and appropriately when they are reported. It is important that workers are provided with a range of accessible and user-friendly anonymous ways to report informally or formally, and make sure that it is confidential. So it's important to make it clear that victimizing those who make reports will not be tolerated and to ensure the safety of those reporting. It's important to ensure that processes and systems for reporting and responding to complaints of bullying, harassment, or other poor behaviors are appropriate, they're transparent, and they're well understood. If the reporting process is effective, then the organization will likely gain great insight to the hazards facing workers, and also possibly the controls that could be put into place. So let's look at some common psychological or psychosocial hazards. So I just want to point out that for the purpose of today, we're just going to go over a couple of hazards. And if there's something going on in your workplace that I don't mention, it certainly doesn't mean it's not a hazard. It just means that it didn't make the list for today. So we're going to look at lack of reward and recognition. So this can be a hazard in the workplace when praise, acknowledgement, or credit are withheld from workers for no good reason. So it could be, when there's a lack of positive feedback about a work condition from your immediate supervisor, and when your accomplishments are not celebrated. So research shows us, and there's an understanding that lack of recognition and reward over time can really affect a worker's feeling about their workplace and affect their mental well-being. Let's look at then the hazard of high job demands. So that doesn't only mean that there's too much work. It can also mean perhaps allocating tasks to workers that are beyond their level or their skill or capacity. It could mean that the employer or the workplace is placing excessive expectations on workers to learn new tasks really quickly, maybe complicated tasks. It also involves giving unreasonable deadlines for work tasks or being pressured to complete work tasks outside of work hours. Sometimes high job demands could mean that there's a lack of resources required to complete necessary tasks or projects, whether that be human resources, physical resources, financial resources. It also can mean maybe there's an absence of team members through because of sickness or leave, and the team is left short to be able to do the work that's needed. So low demand tasks or jobs might be where in a workplace where there's actually too little to do, or maybe the work is highly repetitive or monotonous, which would require low levels of thought processing, and that certainly can be challenging on people as well and affect their mental well-being. Poor support. So this hazard relates to the practical assistance and emotional support that team members or managers can provide. Let's remember how important it is to feel supported in the workplace. So situations that may lead to workers feeling like they're experiencing poor support in the workplace could be where workers are not provided access to tools, resources, information, or the coaching needed to do the job that they have to do. It can occur when workers are asked to work in isolation or geographically dispersed teams, and they're not able to, work together and feel not isolated. It can be sometimes where managers have to manage a really large number of workers, and it makes it difficult for them to provide adequate support to individuals on the team. It can be with workers who do not have the time or the opportunity within work hours to speak with their colleagues or supervisors, because we know that that is an important part of work and feeling belonging in the workplace. So this can lead to the hazard of poor support. When we look at low job control, that's another psychological hazard, possible psychological hazard, where workers generally have little autonomy over the job that they do. We know that autonomy is really important to workers. This hazard can look like workers not being involved in the decisions that affect them or the clients that they serve. It could be when work is tightly managed, when there's a lack of formal opportunities to learn and to develop skills. It also happens when workers have little say in how they do the work. So maybe it's, they can't take a break until certain times. And, we understand that some of that is intrinsic to the work that's done. So it depends on, the work task or the workplace and whether or not it is possible. It also happens sometimes when there's excessive scrutiny or monitoring over tasks that really perhaps are simple and easy for the employee to do. So I think the last hazard we'll look at today is poor change management. Poor change management can lead to psychological injuries and negative health outcomes, as well as reduced productivity. So this factor relates to how organizational change is managed. Situations that may lead to poor organizational change management happen sometimes when change is disorganized or it's unplanned. So, you walk in the door and things are different and you had no warning that, maybe your shift was going to change or the location of your work is going to change. Change without sufficient consultation or engagement, where there's failure to communicate key messages and updates and the reasons for changes. So as I said, every workplace is different and will have different workplace hazards. I may not have mentioned it because every workplace is different, but because I didn't mention it certainly doesn't mean it's not important and it's not having an impact. So let's imagine a team where workers consistently are expected to work late beyond their end time of work. They receive very little feedback and they feel excluded from important decisions that affect them. I'm going to ask you to place in the chat which of the listed psychological hazards you think might be presented from the ones that we covered today. So I'm going to ask you just to pop in the chat whether you think that it's high job demands, lack of recognition and reward, poor support, low job control, or poor change management. So I'm just going to give you a second to do that. And I'm just going to pop off my camera and I will pop it back on at the end of the session. Okay, so thank you for all the responses coming in on what type of possible hazards are in this, presented in this scenario. So what we see in this scenario, where there are workers consistently expected to work late, receive little feedback, and excluded from important decisions, we see that there is the hazards of high job demands, lack of recognition, and low job control. And many of you, put that in the chat. So thank you so much for that. So the next thing we want to look at is, once you have identified all the hazards, it's really time then to assess the level of risk. So some of the things that we want to consider in step 2 is duration. So how long is the worker exposed to the hazard or the risk? The frequency, so how often is the worker exposed to the hazard or risk? And how severe are the hazards and the exposure? So another thing that's important is to consider all of those hazards collectively rather than in isolation. So workers and others who may be exposed to more than one psychological hazard at a time, that certainly can increase the level of risk. So for example, a worker exposed to maybe an aggressive customer is more likely to be harmed if they don't have any other workers present to support them. So there's a lack of support. They do not have the training maybe they need to effectively de-escalate the situation. So assessing those risks collectively may also help you to identify more effective control measures, which we will talk about in the next step. So risk increase when exposure to hazards is more severe. For example, being exposed to perhaps a traumatic incident in the workplace, when they are more frequent, so regularly performing those tasks without the adequate controls or the adequate support. And when the exposure to the hazard is longer in duration, so maybe high job demands over weeks or months. Because we do understand that in a workplace, sometimes there are periods of high job demands, and that's perfectly understandable. But when it is the norm rather than a season or occasionally, then that's when we want to look at that being a potential hazard. Short term, it's important to consider that short term, but severe exposure to a psychosocial hazard, like a violent incident, also would have a more likely ability to harm workers if they were also exposed to something like chronic but less severe hazards, such as low support. So the risk also, as I said, increases when workers are exposed to a combination of hazards. Workers who are exposed to maybe more than one psychological hazard at a time are definitely at higher risk. And the higher the risk, part of the reason that we want to assess the level of risk and understand the severity, how long it's going to occur and how frequent, is we want to be able to make sure that we have adequate solutions in place. So here are some questions that we can maybe use to help determine the level of risk. So there are several questions, and I just have listed a few. So one of the things we can do is think about the hazard that we're assessing, and we could say, well, is it likely that that hazard will result in injury or illness? So when we're thinking about that, we're thinking about psychological injury. So we're talking about negatively affecting somebody's mental well-being or their psychological well-being, perhaps causing unnecessary stress or burnout. And then we want to look at, well, what is the level of stress experienced by workers? Some level of stress is normal and healthy and accepted in a workplace, but we want to determine what that level of stress is is. Is it an inappropriate and heavy level of stress that could, cause some long-term effects? Could the harm to that person be considered serious or severe? Will it produce long or short-term effects to either, the worker, the team, or the workplace? You want to look at, again, how many people are affected. Is it, everybody in the workplace, or are there a certain group of people or a certain person or role in the workplace that would be affected? And how often or how many times per week would the worker be exposed? So let's think back to the scenario that we just talked about, where the team of workers are expected to work late all the time. They receive very little feedback, and they feel excluded from decisions that affect them. So let's assess the level of risk by asking a couple of questions. First question is, how many times per week are the workers expected to work late? And in this scenario, the workers are expected to work late at least 3 to 4 times, and this has been going on for the past 9 months. How many people are affected? There are 6 people on the team, and while there are varied signs of stress, so, everyone is kind of, indicating that they're stressed at different levels, everyone does seem impacted. So all 6 people on the team have been impacted. What is the level of stress experienced by the workers? So the level of stress seems to be moderate. The workload is hard to manage. They feel tired, they feel overwhelmed, and they are at times frustrated and irritable. Another question could be to assess, could the harm be considered serious or severe? So if stress is prolonged, it's reasonable to assume that some workers may experience burnout. So with all of those facts, I want you to just pop in the chat, how likely is that hazard to cause harm? How severe are the consequences? Is the level of risk low to you, to medium, or high? And I'll just give you a little second to write in your chat. So there's no real wrong or right answer here. It's just given the indications that we talked about, the fact that this has been going on for 9 months. They're asked to work late 3 to 4 times a week. They are all indicating, all 6 team members are indicating some level of stress, and the stress seems to be somewhat moderate. So some people are saying that the risk to the workers can be high. Some people are saying that the risk can be medium. And I would agree with that the risk to these workers, their psychological well-being, is definitely between medium and high. So now let's look at, one person said, which is a thoughtful response, it said depends on the employee and their stress level. And that is absolutely true. That is something that we have to consider, is that, it does depend on a number of factors as well. And if we think back to the beginning where we talked about the general premise of psychological safe workplaces, we did say that employees are responsible for their own well-being. However, the workplace is responsible to do no harm. So when we look at finding solutions, using the most effective controls and eliminating as many hazards as possible. So once those hazards have been identified and assessed, you're in a much better position then to control them or to find solutions to reduce either the level of harm or to eliminate the hazard from the workplace altogether. So this does require an investment of time and possibly resources. This is a step in the process that really requires that management commitment and involvement that we talked about in the beginning of the session. Remember, consultation with workers will help you to identify control measures that you may not otherwise think of. From the possible control measures you identify, it's important then to consider which of the control measures are the most reasonable and what combination of controls will be most effective. It's important to first aim to eliminate the risk or the hazard altogether, if possible. So identify as many control measures as you can to achieve this. And then look at the remaining controls or combination of controls from maybe most to least effective, and work to minimize the risk. So we are going to talk about some practical controls, because I know, sometimes it's easy to see the hazards, but it's not as easy to maybe identify how to resolve that, because, all workplaces seem like there's too much work to do or not enough people to do the work that there is. So I know it is important to talk about practical controls. So controls that are reliable and offer the highest level of protection generally are always the most effective. And as I said, we will look at a number of them. It is important to make sure that, because every workplace is different, the best combination of control measures are really going to have to be tailored to your organization's size, type, and work activities to manage risk during everyday operations and emergencies. So, as I said, it's important to do that in consultation with workers. And obviously, you do have to consider what's practical given cost and also the resources of the organization. So when we talk about these controls now for the hazards, I want you to keep those things in mind, that it depends on your workplace, what will work, what's effective, and what is reasonable. So let's look at some practical controls. So we talked about the hazard of where there is a lack of reward and recognition. So let's look at the controls and the fixes or solutions that could possibly fix that. So implementing a performance review system that can ensure workers are provided with positive and constructive feedback at a timely way can really help them, understand where they are in their role and what they need to do to continue to move forward and to develop their skills. Another thing you can do is recognize workers for their outputs, but also for their ideas and their behaviors. So recognizing them for a whole person and what they bring to the team. Make sure that understanding how to do that is built into training for leaders. Sometimes it's natural to leaders to understand how to provide recognition, verbal recognition, but sometimes it is not as natural. So it's important to make sure that supervisors have a range of strategies so that they can recognize others and understand that how people like to be acknowledged and to be appreciated. Possibly you can consider implementing recognition programs that provide all workers with an equal opportunity to be recognized for their contributions. And lots of times those things they can cost money, they can be, financial incentives, but they don't have to be. There's lots of ways that, you can implement recognition for your employees that don't cost a lot of money. And always, it's really important to remember that even just a thank you and appreciation are always good. Avoid rewarding workers who do great work with more work or the work of other people not pulling their weight. So that's rarely a good way to positively appreciate each other or appreciate someone. Effective feedback is a really important part of rewarding and recognizing employees. And let's just take a minute to look at how to really do effective feedback. So when you're giving feedback as a supervisor, it's important that it's specific. So it kind of gives you an idea of what happened, what this scenario was. It's impactful, so why that matters so much to the workplace, and it's actionable. It gives them, something to follow up with or to do next if needed. So here I have just an idea of what can be general feedback and what can make that feedback a little bit more specific, impactful, and actionable. So, it's so easy just to say to someone, good job. And sometimes that's appropriate. But if you wanted to make that more specific, more impactful, and more actionable, you could put a little more detail around it. So the example that I'm giving here is you gave that client the time and attention they deserved. You are great at customer service. So that's just a little bit more than just saying good job. If you're giving somebody some indication that they need to do something a little differently, instead of saying maybe you need to try harder, you could say something like, When you serve a customer, it would be really helpful if you gave them a friendly hello and made eye contact. Customers respond well to a welcoming greeting. I'm just taking a sip of water. So another general feedback, that report needs improvement. So a way to make that more specific, excuse me, would be to say that report was done really well. However, it was a week late. It's important that you respect the due date next time. So then I have another one there, another general feedback. Keep up the good work. So what I want you to do now is I want you to take a few minutes and think about your own job. So maybe you're an employee and you would appreciate some specific impactful feedback from your employer. I want you to frame up what it would be nice if they said to you instead of just keep up the good work. And then if you're a supervisor, I just want you to think about your team and maybe come up with a more detailed way that can be really impactful to your employees to describe the general feedback of keep up the good work. So I'm just going to give you a minute to do that and just remind you, as well to just take a little stretch break. Maybe if you're sitting, stand. And I'm going to pause for a second and just take a sip of water, and I'll be right back while you work on your specific feedback. All right, thank you for doing that. So just a reminder that giving good feedback helps employees feel supported and helps them feel recognized for the work that they're doing. And that's a really important part of dealing with that hazard. So then we want to look at job demands. So job demand seems to, be something that a lot of people deal with. And so some of the things that we can do is design the work to ensure manageable workloads. And some of the ways that we can do that are perhaps looking at rotating tasks and activities so that workers are not overexposed to those high level of time pressured or excessively demanding work. So perhaps you could rotate it between different workers or throughout the week or throughout the shift. But really maybe looking at that to make sure that the workload is appropriately manageable. Another thing you could do is make sure that you negotiate reasonable deadlines for completing tasks. So, sometimes deadlines are hard to move, but where possible, where, we can make sure that they're reasonable and give people, the appropriate amount of work to do the work that needs to be done, that definitely needs to be considered. Making sure that workers are provided with not only the time, but the resources and the equipment that they need to perform the tasks that they're assigned. It's really important to schedule regular breaks throughout the day and throughout the week, the month, the year to ensure that workers are taking breaks and they're getting adequate rest and recovery. It's important for organizations to make sure that they monitor and manage workloads, especially during times of peak demand, and ensure that work tasks and the jobs are matched well with the workers' capacity. It's important to ensure sufficient cover for workers who are on leave, and also to implement flexible working policies and practices where that is possible. And also is, something else to just keep in mind is to increase supervision or support when, the job is quite emotional or, for some reason quite draining. So when it comes to job demands, and I think that's something that a lot of us do deal with, in society now, I'll say that, job demands seem to be high. It can be really challenging to have a conversation with your employer about, the workload and the heavy job demands. So I'm just going to take a little closer look at maybe dealing with high job demands from the employee, from the worker perspective. So, having that conversation, as I said, can be challenging. But the alternative, I guess, to not having the conversation is that things continue to work at the same pace, and possibly can really cause stress and burnout. So it's important to have that conversation. So what I've provided here, and I just want to note that this is just a little snippet here on the screen. This tool is something from Workplace Strategies and Mental Health, and it is for workers to use to have that difficult conversation with workplaces. So that's put in the resource section, or also you can get this on Workplace Strategies for Mental Health website. And it's a tool that kind of helps a worker dig into the issue and reflect on underlying causes of work stress and explore positive solutions that will help support our success at work. So this tool can be used in a variety of ways. It can be used by workers on their own, or by workers to prepare a discussion with their leaders, or as a collaborative discussion with workers as well. So this is just one tool, but it's just something that I wanted to bring forward because I know that it is challenging to have that conversation. In the resource section, you will also find a similar guide for employers. So when it looks at support, there's different types of support that are important in the workplace. Each builds trust and a positive organizational culture. So we want to do some things that provide practical support that could, make sure that there's clear reporting lines, that vacant roles are filled, leaders have soft skills, and also we want to look at social support. So that's making sure in the workplace there's those meaningful connections. Maybe it's creating shared workplaces, but it's important that there is a genuine care and concern showed and support for workers. Then we also want to keep in mind managerial support. So, managers practicing active listening and understanding the need, that workers have. For example, the need for work-life harmony. So I'm just going to take a second to do a little reflection on support. So if you're on the call and you're a leader, you're a supervisor or manager, I want you to take a minute to reflect on how you are currently providing support to your workplace and to your team. And I want you to write down, just on a piece of paper, or if you feel comfortable to share, you can certainly put it in the chat. And one way that you can improve the support, or you would like to improve, or you're inspired to improve the support that you are providing your team. If you're a worker, I want you to take a minute to reflect on what makes you feel supported at work and how that in turn makes you feel about your workplace. And if you feel confident enough, then you can maybe talk to your supervisor about that later. So I'm just going to give you a second to think about that. So let's look at change management. So change management is crucial because it guides organizations and people through transition. It minimizes disruption and reduces resistance to change. It ensures that strategic goals can be met by focusing on the human side of change. It improves productivity, it boosts morale, and it maintains competitiveness in a dynamic environment. So essentially, change is, inevitable. It's just how we frame up the change and how we move through change that can prevent costly failures. It can boost engagement when it's done well, and it helps teams to adapt to new things like technologies, processes, which leads to sustained growth. So to effectively manage change, it's important to consult workers who are likely to be affected by the change, and to allow sufficient time for change where possible. So again, sometimes the change is, it happens fast and it is hard to, communicate beforehand, but where change, can be planned, it's very important to do that. Always consider if the change is actually needed, if it's reasonable, fair, and necessary. And it's important to provide clear information about upcoming changes as soon as possible and to keep employees up to date so that they understand the change and they understand the need for the change. And support is really important when an organization is going through a big change. It's important to make sure that we show empathy as well, because change is very hard for people. For some people, it's harder than others. So it's important to show empathy and to understand that people can feel frustrated when change happens. To effectively implement the controls that you identify are needed to address the hazards, it will require an investment. It's an investment of time, of educating, so showing the workers what has to change and how, how it's going to be implemented in the workplace. And it also requires quality leadership, so really leading people through the process of implementing these controls. Another thing that's really important to keep in mind is step 4, which is evaluate and monitor. So the last step of this process that we walk through today is to review the effectiveness of the implemented controls to ensure that they are working as planned. So you might see immediate results, and some results may really need to be measured and implemented over time. Keep in mind that if a control measure is implemented and it's not working effectively, it's time to review that and maybe modify and replace that. So you've looked at the process of identifying your hazards, so trying to determine in your own workplace what are the things that could possibly cause harm to your employees. You're going to use all of those methods we talked about to identify all the possible hazards, and then you're going to assess them. You're going to implement positive controls so that you can either eliminate the hazard, which is obviously the best thing to do, or if not, to reduce the harm. And then you're going to look at the things that you've done, the things that you've changed and implemented. Have they been effective? So let's talk a little bit about how some tools that you can have for your toolbox after today that can help you with the process of assessing your own workplace. So Workplace NL has recently developed a roadmap to help employers walk through the 4 steps of assessing psychological hazards, identify them, evaluating them, finding appropriate solutions, and monitoring the process. That resource has been provided to you in the resource section of this webinar, but it is also on our website. You can just look up roadmap, I believe, if you look in the search, and if not, you can certainly reach out to us. Perhaps, we can share the link as well. So this roadmap will help you walk through the process we talked about today. It guides you through a scenario, and it gives a little bit even more detailed information about this process, because of course today we only have the 1 hour to work through this. So I think you'll find that really helpful in helping you understand how to work through the process of managing psychological hazards. So I did mention today workplace strategies for mental health. That's a great tool for in workplaces, and it's a free resource. There is so many things on this website that can help you. And here it is. You can just look up workplace strategies for mental health, and it's a really, really great tool and resource. There is a global standard for giving practical guidance on managing psychological health and risk in the workplace. It's called ISO 45003, and that's something that you can purchase and help guide you through the process. We also have, like to mention, and we will talk about this more throughout the week, is the Psychological Health and Safety in the Workplace CSA standard, and that can be gotten on the CSA website. And also we do have coming soon, early in this year, we will have a free Introduction to Psychological Health and Safety online course that you can take at your own time and help you understand more about psychological health and safety in the workplace. And that does address also managing hazards. So today we've looked at creating a psychological health and safety and how we can help. And in those workplaces where we address psychological hazards, we identify them and we manage them, generally workers are happier, they feel more productive, and they're more engaged. So I just want to mention that we do have some new podcasts coming out this week on psychological health and safety to promote our Psychological Health and Safety Week. And I encourage you to listen into those, and there'll be more information about that throughout the week. There's the QR code for our upcoming webinars if you want to grab that, or you can certainly attend our, visit our website and we'll give you that information. And if you're ever looking for an in-person, in your workplace webinar, you can certainly reach out to us and we can help you with that for sure. I would also like to mention before we clue up today that there are 4 more webinars throughout this week, and the information on those is on our website, and I would really encourage you to attend those. On Wednesday, we have our special guest, Louise Bradley, who will be joining one of our Workplace NL staff to talk about the business case. And that's going to be a really informative and wonderful webinar for you to join. So I would really appreciate that. I do see that there are a couple of questions, and unfortunately, I want to respect, that the webinar is over at 11 o'clock. So I just want to let you know that for the people that asked questions, I will definitely reach out to you by email and respond to those. And if there is anyone else who has a question, you certainly can email us, based on this information that you learned today, and we will certainly get back to you and help you out with that. So I want to thank you and wish you a very healthy and safe day.